When you have doubts about something that you believe, what should you do? Explore them? Determine if what you believe is actually justifiable? No, according to the religious, you ought to just run away and hide, at least until you've been sufficiently brainwashed to withstand the slings and arrows of reality. It's dumb, but here we go again. It really isn't that often that you run into an absolute goldmine of religious stupidity on display, but we've got one of those waiting for us today. Here comes Erik Manning of Testify, proving that he cares nothing about actual truth. He's just got a cult to push, and that requires saving the potentially vulnerable people, the ones who can think for themselves. It means keeping them away from critics because he can't trust them to reject the existing evidence and cling to the religious mind poison without exception. So let's see how bad this gets and why, as is no surprise, Erik is just as bad as all of the other apologists out there. Maybe even a little worse.
Hey, you, anxious Christian dude. Yeah, you, the guy with the doubts. Stop listening to atheist YouTubers.
And that's a really bad piece of advice right there. I get it, I really do. If you want to keep maintaining your emotional beliefs, well, stop thinking about reason, logic, and evidence and just believe blindly. It's just really terrible advice because maintaining belief in emotional things for no other reason than it makes you happy is a bad idea all around. Of course, that says some pretty suspect things about religion. But the simple fact is, they rely on dumb people, irrational folks who don't ask questions and who don't really care if any of it is true. They just really want to believe. Don't be like that. That's idiotic. You can be a whole lot better.
It's time to stop!
Turn off rationality rules, turn off holy Kool-Aid, turn off genetically modified skeptic, and turn off Matt Dillahunty.
But don't turn off bitch spot. That's not self-serving or anything, just don't do it. But you notice what he's doing here, right? He's saying that when you have doubts, simply double down on your blind faith and don't allow anyone to tell you that you're wrong. Dig deeper into your religious safe space and don't think about it because that's how you come to credible, rational conclusions, right? Oh, wait.
Listen, I know you want to mitigate against your biases by listening to the other side. I know that sounds like a wise thing to do, but you're actually being stupid. Hear me out.
Yeah, okay, sure, but only because I'm making a video on you. I never thought that Erik was a worthwhile apologist after all, not like any of them are, because this is the kind of thing that he pulls. Only listen to the things that reinforce your biases, but never the things that show you that your biases are wrong. But shouldn't the goal here be to get closer to the actual truth? Not to just mindlessly reinforce your faith, but to actually figure out if your faith is true. No, not a chance, at least not coming from a religious standpoint, because they don't care about the truth. They're only after emotional comfort. Anyone who tells you to do that, though, they're an idiot, and that club now includes Erik Manning. You can't tell people to hide away from reality because it might make you sad, and still pretend to be a credible thinker. Granted, I don't think he's ever claimed to be a credible thinker, but, whatever. We'll see what else he has to say. But now, he's just fighting to get out of a hole that he dug for himself. Let's see if he can.
I've been doing apologetics ministry for a while now, and one common mistake I see from Christians struggling with their faith is that they try and prematurely flex their apologetic muscles by spending time listening to tons of atheist YouTubers, but they don't get the bulk of Christian evidences strong under their belt first.
Maybe that's because they don't exist. I know the religious would like to think that they do, but take it from me and from tons and tons of other non-religious or formerly religious thinkers who have spent a very long time evaluating these claims without biases, they simply aren't real. In fact, I was listening to a call-in show not too long ago where a flat earther was making all kinds of unsupportable claims, and the only thing he could say when questioned was, because the Bible. Well, why the Bible? Because that's what I believe. Yet, when questioned on that, he couldn't come up with anything else. He just repeated the same load of faith-based bullshit over and over and over again because he had no credible answers. It was just, I wanna! And that's just stupid.
So when they come across a few things that stump them, they get troubled, anxious, or even set aside their faith altogether. This is falling prey to what the great English logician Richard Whately called the fallacy of objections. Whately defined the fallacy of objections as showing that there are objections against some plan, theory, or system, and thence inferring that it should be rejected, when that which ought to have been proved is that there are more or stronger objections against the receiving than the rejecting of it.
Again, we're back to, let's quote somebody from the distant past, something that Christians seem to really get off on. Now, I will agree in theory that you shouldn't just follow the whims of what you've heard last. That kind of thing does happen all the time. However, you do need to be able to evaluate the evidence for any given proposition, both for and against, before you come to a conclusion, and all conclusions have to be provisional, held only until more evidence comes along that tip you one way or the other. The problem with religion is that the evidence just isn't stacking up on their side. Their claims become more and more and more ridiculous as time goes on. People like Erik, and let's look at his description for a second. Yep, he's asking for money all over the place. Erik needs to keep them stupid and donating. So keep that in mind before listening to anybody telling you not to pay attention to anybody who might affect the apologist's bottom line.
Again, I understand that you want to mitigate your biases by listening to the other side. However, until you yourself can articulate a robust case for Christianity, I don't recommend that you do that at all.
Well, maybe there is no robust case for Christianity. Did you ever think of that? No, of course not. Not with a profit motive like he clearly has. Now, I'm not saying he's a crook. It's clear that some of them are, but I'm not accusing Erik of only doing this for a buck. I think that lots of Christians wind up accepting Christianity as part of their core self-concept, and then they arbitrarily reject anything that disagrees because they can't handle the possibility that they've been wrong the whole time. They claim to have good reasons to believe, but those reasons don't stand up to any kind of rational evaluation from the outside. It's all, I'm right because I'm right, without any coherent way to show that you actually are. It becomes bald confirmation bias, and that's really not something that you should be proud of.
If the Bible is correct by describing faith as a precious thing, and you're just casually throwing your weak faith into the fires of criticism without understanding the shape of the argumentative landscape first, you're not being wise by trying to minimize your biases. You're being careless. And no, I'm not at all saying that you should Pascal's wager yourself into faith or lower the epistemic bar either.
I take it he had recently heard William Lane Craig's stupidity and is just trying to mitigate that, but in reality, that's exactly what he's saying. Start off with a strong faith first so that you can weather the slings and arrows that you might find by looking beyond your little religious circle. Make sure your biases all run the right way before you find out that your beliefs might not be true. Because for rational people, that's not how it works. You don't need to show favoritism toward one side or the other of any given proposition. You just need evidence. Evaluate all sides fairly, and then make a decision based on where the actual evidence leads. The religious can't do that, though, because I think they know that their side is the weaker of the two by far, and getting weaker every single day. That they feel that they have to brainwash people first before allowing them to see that the other side even exists. It's the kind of thing that Scientology used to do before the cat was out of the bag. They knew that the whole Xenu thing was just stupid. So they kept that a secret until they'd indoctrinated people into their cult, at which time it was a little bit too late to back out again easily. That kind of thing went away when the internet came along and everybody could see the insanity, but that's really the kind of conditioning that we're talking about, and that seems to be what Erik is advocating. Yeah, that's dumb. Hard pass.
But I will say that you're not performing your duty of inquiry properly, and you're probably going to end up being another statistic or worse if you're not cautious.
Meaning you're going to leave the ridiculous joke of Christianity behind, as you should, and he doesn't like that because that's fewer people to support online apologists like Erik Manning. So you better be careful, otherwise you might become one of those atheists, like that's a bad thing. Granted, from his perspective it is, but then again, his perspective isn't very rational, is it?
Regarding the fallacy of objections, Whately went on to write, "This is the main and almost universal fallacy of anti-Christians, and is that of which a young Christian should be first and principally warned. They find numerous objections against various parts of Scripture, to some of which no satisfactory answer can be given, and the incautious hearer is apt, while his attention is fixed on these, to forget that there are infinitely more and stronger objections against the supposition that the Christian religion is of human origin, and that, where we cannot answer all objections, we are bound in reason and in candor to adopt the hypothesis which labors under the least."
This is a very common kind of claim that is made by the religious. Unfortunately, they can't back any of it up. These are the people who claim that they have evidence, but when asked what it might be, they can't really produce any. Let me think. I had an experience. I felt the Holy Spirit. Yeah, demonstrate any of that. Well, they can't. It just feels good to think that it happened. But we're not asking what you believe. We're asking what you can prove, and they can't prove that any of this ever happened the way they describe. Therefore, they have no evidence, because evidence is by its very nature demonstrable. So put up or shut up. It doesn't matter what you feel. It doesn't matter what you claim unless you can show that it actually exists somehow beyond your head. It's clear by these quotes that the non-religious have been after for centuries at the very least, and the Christians haven't gotten any better at providing them, only in hiding from the questions themselves.
Whately is spot on. The reason why I can read Bart Ehrman books, listen to historical Jesus classes in secular universities, or watch YouTube counter-apologists and be completely untroubled is because I've got the bulk of the Christian evidences under my belt first.
Because you're a fanatic. You don't care about the facts. You don't care about the evidence. You only want to believe the things to which you are emotionally attached, and you think you've reached a point in your life where you can just ignore reality in favor of your religious fantasy land. You are a dumb shit. This is really why you're not remotely impressive to anybody with a brain, because you adopt your beliefs emotionally, not rationally. You can't present any of these supposed evidences, and that's still not a word, and when asked, you just really want it to be true, and you think that faith gets you anywhere worthwhile when, in fact, it doesn't. All he's really doing here is speaking out in favor of religiously biased ignorance. If you really want it to be true, then it's got to be true, right? But unfortunately for you, it doesn't make it true.
For example, over and over again, when I see people making objections to the Gospels, I see examples of overreading, making argument from silence, ignoring the possibility of independent access to real events, and so forth.
And when I talk to Christians, all I see is blind faith. I see all of the things that they want to believe are true, not the things that they can independently verify are actually true. What you want to be true is only true if you can independently and objectively corroborate it with demonstrable evidence, and you people have absolutely nothing of the sort. What you like doesn't mean anything, and you really have nothing beyond that. This is why you're as much of a joke as every other apologist out there. When we ask you how you know what you claim to know, all you can do is present what you believe. Well, it doesn't matter what you believe. It matters only what you can demonstrate. And let's be honest, you can't demonstrate anything. Here you are telling everybody else that they ought to be just as ignorant as you are because being ignorant makes you happy, because you really don't want to know anything. You'd rather just feel everything. And that's just sad.
I also understand if I don't know why Jesus said such and such, or why Leviticus has this weird command, or I don't know how to resolve this apparent discrepancy right at the moment, that my whole edifice is going to collapse.
But you've just described why your whole edifice is completely pointless. Let's go back and explore all of that again because it's a really clear example of exactly what he's doing wrong.
I also understand if I don't know why Jesus said such and such.
You don't know if Jesus was even real. You have no objectively demonstrable evidence at all to support it. All you have are the words of anonymous authors in a book of mythology that you really happen to like. They are purported to be the words of Jesus, but you can't independently demonstrate that they are. You have faith, but faith doesn't mean anything. So let's keep going.
Or why Leviticus has this weird command.
But you just assume that it has to mean something, right? You assume the Bible without being able to demonstrate the Bible, and that's just running on pure faith and fee-fees. It's just stupid.
Or I don't know how to resolve this apparent discrepancy right at the moment.
But you assume it isn't real. Notice how he said that there was an apparent discrepancy. It's not real because he has faith that there can't be any actual contradictions. He's assuming things that are simply not in evidence, based on his own religious wishful thinking. When we point out that this is what they're doing, they just deny it. Yet you only have to pay attention to how they're talking to see that that's exactly what's going on. This is working on blind faith without having any interest in actual reality because it doesn't matter what you want to be true. The only thing that matters is what is objectively and demonstrably true. And the religious, they don't care at all about that. Erik is proving that right before our eyes. Why is anybody listening to this stupid fuck? What kind of an idiot is he?
That my whole edifice is going to collapse. The evidence for Christianity is a whole lot tougher than that, as Whately indicates.
Except it's not, other than to people who are running on pure faith and fee-fees. It doesn't matter what you want to be true. It matters only what is actually true, and rational people don't operate like he's proven that he operates. Rational people evaluate the evidence first, and then they go only where it leads. Your wishful thinking is irrelevant, but that's how the religious work, and that's positively idiotic. We can see that in our own resident theistic morons. By the time this video finally comes out, sometime in January I'm figuring, but I'll have written a post over on the blog evaluating Jeremy Crowfoot, or whoever the hell he is, however you say that, who says, in response to a request for evidence, I don't have to prove anything that God has already proven. Cool. Where's your evidence that God has proved anything? Better yet, where's your evidence that God exists? Well, I don't have to prove something that God has already proven. Yeah, he's just repeating himself, but repeating your own stupidity doesn't make it any less stupid. I'll throw a link to the post in the comments if you want to see a complete takedown, but it really comes down to exactly that. Asserting things that can't be demonstrated and then just repeating it ad nauseum until people get tired of listening to you. That's religion in a nutshell for you folks. It's just fucking stupid.
The same thing is true about a well-established scientific theory. You don't just throw out a good theory based on some counter-evidence that we don't exactly know how to answer yet.
Actually, we do. If you have a scientific hypothesis for which the evidence doesn't support it, then you reject the hypothesis. It has been falsified. It doesn't matter how emotionally attached you are to the idea, it doesn't pass critical muster. We set it aside based on what the evidence says, and you might come back later on and take a look at it again once you have more evidence, but you don't believe it. It's possible to resurrect it somewhere down the line if we can reformulate into something that isn't at odds with the evidence, but so long as it is not worth considering. And that's the problem with religion, because they don't change their beliefs based on the evidence that we currently have at hand. They just assume that someday, maybe, hopefully, they'll figure out how to explain their way around it. They are emotionally invested in the belief. They are not remotely interested in the truth. That's pretty much the entire problem with religion right there. They just don't care about reality. And it shows.
So if you're easily troubled and shaken by listening to counter-apologists on YouTube, here's my advice. Stop listening to them, at least for a season.
Stop until you can be just as brainwashed as Erik here is. Don't listen to reason, because reason is the antithesis of religion. This isn't at all about picking the ideas that are best supported by the evidence. It's about adopting a default belief system based on blind faith and clinging to it tenaciously because it might hurt your precious fee-fees if you dared to ask any difficult questions. In fact, if Christianity, and this does go for any religion, but if they had any credibility whatsoever, they wouldn't be afraid of asking questions. They'd have plenty of objectively verifiable evidence available to quell even the most ardent of skeptics. They just don't. And it's why they want believers to go into hiding where the big bad atheists can't school them on objective reality and maybe cause the vast majority of them to say, this is really, really stupid, and just walk away. Like what's actually going on.
Stop it. Get some help.
Learn the positive case for Christianity first. And here I'm not talking about a handful of philosophical arguments for the existence of God and some minimal facts argument for the resurrection.
Well, that's all you've got, and every single last one of those falls apart under even the most cursory of rational evaluation. That's kind of the problem. You've got Jack, and everybody knows it. Well, everyone except for you, apparently. You think the case is very, very strong. If only you have enough fanatical blind faith to weather the slings and arrows of reality. Because who really cares about that, right?
At this point, I'm sure skeptics will laugh and say that I'm just circling the wagons and telling you to indoctrinate yourself first. But that's not really true. What I'm saying is this. Don't act like if Christianity is true, it can take the heat. Christianity can take the heat. It's done so for the past 2,000 years. But a lazy and unprepared mind can't take the heat.
I'd say that's actually you, Erik, who can't take the heat. If Christianity could, it wouldn't have to hide. It wouldn't have to spend the last 2,000 years killing unbelievers and pushing their emotional baggage on everyone else. You wouldn't have Christian apologists outright lying for a buck and saying, when it comes to your faith, lower the bar. You'd be able to present actual evidence to support the things that you believe. And we all know that you can't. You make tons of excuses for why you can't, but when push comes to shove, you are all utterly worthless. You really are. Then you have to make videos like this one, and this is hardly the first of them that I've seen, that tell Christians to circle the wagons, lest reality get a grip on their fragile faith. No, you have to become a lunatic first and stop paying attention to the real world, because only then can you be the kind of Christian that's invulnerable to demonstrable facts. Because you people don't care, and that's utterly pathetic. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Erik. You're not, and that's sad, but this just proves what an ass you are.
Learn to steelman the argument for Christianity first. investigate how Christians have responded to common objections over the past few centuries, and then learn how to be the best devil's advocate that you can be.
That sounds fine, except it's all nonsense. First off, you can't steel man a terrible argument, and whether you like it or not, Christianity and indeed all religions are actively terrible. There is no rationally valid way to get to an imaginary man in the sky. What he's really saying here is that you should get more brainwashed before you dare face any of the critics of his religion. What I'm saying is you should be after the best supported side, full stop. Don't worry about your feelings. Your feelings don't matter. Only reality does. Don't pick one side for emotional reasons and just blindly support it until the bitter end, because that's utterly idiotic. This is just playing emotional favorites, and that's not how rational people operate. But as is no surprise, these are not rational people, are they?
So, what exactly is so wrong with that? The atheists can feel free to do the same with their worldview. George Horne, another 18th century apologist, has some sage advice. He writes, "These same difficulties have been again and again urged and discussed in public, again and again weighed and considered by learned and sensible men, of the laity as well as the clergy, who have by no means been induced by them to renounce their faith. Many and painful are the researches sometimes necessary to be made for settling points of that kind."
And once again, we're back to the believers of the past, as though their ideas automatically remain valid because you really want them to be. This just shows that this kind of faith-based nonsense has been going on forever because the religious just don't give a crap about the actual truth value of their beliefs. Erik has spent the entire video so far arguing that feelings trump facts, and you should get your feelings in order before they get overwhelmed by the facts of the other side. This is really hard to overstate just how idiotic it is. Yet, this is exactly what religion does, right?
Pertness and ignorance may ask a question in 3 lines, which it will cost learning and ingenuity 30 pages to answer. When this is done, the same question shall be triumphantly asked again the next year, as if nothing had ever been written upon the subject.
I don't really have to point out that this is exactly how Christianity works, right? This is the very basis of the Gish Gallop, after all. Look at any apologist, including probably Erik, and you'll see them putting this into practice. How many times has Frank Turek or William Lane Craig been corrected on their misconceptions, only to have them repeated verbatim almost immediately? In fact, it might have been Erik who had a talk with Apologia a couple of months ago now, where Erik, I think it was, don't quote me, but I think, promised that he would never say that atheists thought something came from nothing ever again. Has he started doing it again, though? I don't know. I don't really watch his videos. I have no faith in Erik whatsoever, but for all we know, he's back to spouting that old chestnut already. Because, as we all know, this isn't about truth. This is about fifis and using bad arguments that you ought to know aren't true. That's part and parcel with what apologetics actually is.
As Horne implies, Christians have answered the same tired objections over and over, yet that won't stop ex-evangelicals with a TikTok or a YouTube account from saying it with a ton of confidence again, as if no one has ever responded to it before.
But that's the thing. You have offered ad hoc rationalizations. You haven't actually demonstrably answered any of it. That's the problem. They seem to think that if they can dream up any conceivably decent-sounding solution in their heads, suddenly the problems all go away, and nobody can ever doubt your imagined explanations ever again. This happens all the time with Bible contradictions. Well, it could have been like this. And because it could have been, suddenly they think that's what actually happened and they don't want to talk about it anymore. But if you can't prove that that's the way it happened, I don't care about your invented answers. Either show how it actually happened and provide your direct, demonstrable evidence to support it, or stop making fools of yourself. It's really not that hard to understand.
Finally, if you don't know what the evidence looks like, I'll be sure to pin a comment with tons of resources that you can check out.
leading back into your own religious echo chamber, I'm sure, because the goal of people like Erik is to get people to believe whether those things are actually reasonable, rational, or defensible or not. It all comes down to, but I just want to believe. And that's not a rational way to look at reality. This is Erik just telling people to run away for the sake of their feelings. It's like trying to herd believers back into their religious safe spaces where they don't have to be bothered with credible questions about the absurd things that they have in their heads. And that's just stupid.
Also, be sure to watch the playlist on this channel. Avail yourself to the ministry talkaboutdoubts.com and get some one-on-one assistance.
Only from people who have the same goals as Erik, of course. None of these people actually care about the truth, only about their own emotional comfort. What expertise do these people actually have? Or are they just going to throw an endless array of Bible verses at you and hang up on you if you ask anything really difficult? I really wouldn't be that surprised if that was the case, would you?
There you can find a community of experts and scholars far more seasoned than yourself. Learn first, and then after you got the bulk of the evidences of Christianity under your belt and you understand the argumentative landscape, at that point, dive into the objections that trouble you the most, one at a time, with a community to help you if needed, and don't overwhelm yourself.
Once you're sufficiently brainwashed and completely convinced that Christianity is right for no good reason, even if it's not, then you can go back out and look at objections so long as you have a group of people behind you to tell you that all the objections are automatically wrong because, of course, Christianity is automatically right. Does anyone else see just how self-serving this is? Well, everybody does except Erik here because he's only trying to keep his cult going. Again, rational people don't work this way. They don't start with a conclusion that can't be wrong. They evaluate all of the evidence that's available, and then they make decisions based entirely on that. And maybe that's something that Christians should try. If you're not afraid that Christianity might go the way of the dodo.
That's my whole point. Otherwise, consider that you're probably being like an overconfident fool who, after learning a few fighting moves, tries to jump in the ring with a more experienced fighter. You're going to look foolish and get hurt.
As opposed to Erik here, who honestly looks like he's terrified all the time. Because that's the problem with Christianity, again, all religion in fact. They take certain things on blind faith and base their entire belief structure on things that cannot be objectively demonstrated to be true. I mean, take the Bible since that's the most common. The Bible just has to be true. Why? Because it is. So we start looking at all the actual evidence surrounding the Bible and find out that it's questionable at best, complete mythology at worst, depending on what parts you read, and that most of the ideas contained within the Bible, they are entirely indefensible given any rational evaluation. Now, for most of us, if that's the case after evaluating the evidence, we'd reject it as what it is, a book of unreliable mythology written largely by anonymous authors who we can't even show were eyewitnesses to anything, especially in the New Testament, and therefore it's a historical curiosity and nothing more. But they have their emotions attached and therefore they don't care about any of that. They just want to believe. And because they want to believe, the evidence just doesn't matter. Erik here is trying to keep people emotionally attached to his cult. He doesn't care if it's true because he just wants it to be true and nothing else really matters. This is Erik making a complete fool of himself, and in that, he really isn't remotely alone. This is what religion does to people. It makes them brain dead and believing things for which there is no rational justification, and sadly, they don't care about any of that, do they? They just want that stupid dopamine hit in the head, and that's just dumb. Because that's religion. Dumb. That's all it is. The whole thing is just embarrassing.
bum,